Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the FIA Group.
Well, hello there. It's me, Ron Peck, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the FIA Group, coming to you not so live from my dungeon basement here, aka the home office, aka the igloo. Hopefully everybody is doing well and feeling well. With me, giving me some comfort during these times of strife, is our producer, the one and only Pat the Man Santos. Pat, the podcast producer, the triple P, the triple threat. Hey, Pat, keep it up. Really, it's more taking it on faith that you're there, because at this point, I'm just talking to a ballpoint pen here on my desk. But I do know someone who's here because I can hear his heavy breathing. Brady Bizarro is with us. Brady, how you doing, buddy?
I am here. Hello, Ron.
Great. Listen, it's almost here. It's inauguration day. For those who are downloading the podcast, you're wondering, man, when do these guys record it? What's that strange noise in the background? Was it raining on that day? What day was it? Well, today is inauguration day. It's January 20th, and the media is all aflutter with witticisms about President Trump leaving office, President-elect Biden becoming President Biden, 4 years in review. And, it's monumental. It's amazing to think 4 years ago, my son was 1 year old. He's 5 now. It seems like yesterday. It's so weird. And yet at the same time, it's been a long time. Brady, I was going back through some of the webinars that we have done over the last couple of years, not even 4, but just the last 2 years, looking for some material for some new presentations. And I got to tell you, some of the topics that we talked about a year ago, 2 years ago, that we thought were so important, so earth-shattering, that we had to do not just one, but multiple webinars about the topic. And I see, references to executive orders and plans that the Trump administration has for this or for that. You think about it now, and some of those big issues, people aren't even talking about it anymore. Some of these things seem like they happened forever ago. And it's amazing to think about how much has happened in the last 4 years, that regardless of where you stand politically, it really does make you stop and realize just how much time can go by in such a blink of the eye. And, it's funny, I was looking, for instance, Brady, I remember when you were on a high about drug manufacturers putting their prices in commercials. Remember when that was all the rage?
I do.
It's so funny how it's just these things, they came up, we thought they were going to be relevant, they were at the time, and then something else just changes everything. A pandemic, an election, a contentious election, a lot of hard feelings everywhere. It's amazing how these things, and how we need to stay so nimble and be able to pivot as these things change, and why it's so important that we all work together as an industry to stay up to date, advised, and stay tuned in to the Empowering Plans podcast, which is what you're listening to right now. And without any more self-promotion, Brady, we're here to talk a little bit about the political goings-on, the impeachment. We're closing sort of the book on the administration. We're beginning a new one. Like I said before, it's inauguration day. I mean, there's a lot of time for introspection, but also time to discuss. And I know the first thing you wanted to talk about was the impeachment. And, your thoughts on it, a potential impact, where do you think it's going? The floor is yours.
Well, Ron, I think you mentioned how time passed and how quickly. For me, I mean, and for many people that are, politicos, it felt like one long year where so many things happened so quickly. I mean, it really was a breakneck pace to keep up with, which certainly kept me busy. But the reason I think impeachment's worth discussing is not from a political point of view, because that's not our role here, but because of the impact it's going to have on Biden's agenda. We measure, in politics at least, achievements in presidencies by a 100-day yardstick. That's sort of like the standard thing that you do for every administration now, going back, I think, to even FDR. And so for Biden's first 100 days, the real question is going to be how much will he be able to get done with an impeachment trial going on? And there's no easy answer here. Basically, where we stand now is we know the president has been impeached a second time. One article of impeachment has not yet been transmitted to the Senate. But once it does, it effectively starts this process where the Senate has to take it up. And there's a question about whether the Senate can also consider legislative business alongside the impeachment trial in a procedure called bifurcation. I won't get into too much detail to put our listeners to sleep, but just know that it doesn't seem like Senate is supposed to be able to do both things at once, even though they probably can. But the Senate has a process ruler called a parliamentarian who will get to decide whether or not the Senate can do two things at once here. And if they can, that'll be good for Biden's agenda because he can get his nominees confirmed to important posts like HHS, for example, right? He can also begin to take some kind of legislative action if he wants to, in actions that require Senate approval. If he can't do that, this trial could really gum up the works for a couple of weeks. And especially if soon-to-be former President Trump decides to fight back in this trial and wants to call witnesses and maybe himself, to appear in the chamber, this could drag on for a while. So that's why we're waiting to see what the Senate decides it can do. We should know that probably in about a week or so. But yeah, it's going to be a big deal to see how this plays out.
Speaking of, the Senate and Congress, stepping back from the executive branch for a second, the Democratic control of Congress hurts the impact on budget reconciliation, some of the issues that we've been tracking. What do you think sort of the state of the nation is as far as the House and Senate, Congress?
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question. People in our industry are all scrambling to see, what are they going to predict is going to happen with healthcare. Anyone who can guess right in terms of what will happen will be far ahead of the game, both for their own businesses and for their industries. And this time, for the first time in 6 years, we have the Democrats back in control of the Senate, and they now control the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And the last time that was all the case for the Democrats, they passed the Affordable Care Act. So there is a chance that some significant changes could be coming to healthcare, given now that the Senate has flipped sides. Now we know that it's a 50-50 tie, right? We had these two races in Georgia, which were decided, but it's still an even split Senate with the vice president being able to cast the tie-breaking vote. But there are still many moderate Democrats in the Senate. And so what I'll be looking to see is, do they keep the filibuster rule, which requires 60 votes to pass legislation, or do they get rid of it? If they keep it, then in order to pass significant changes to laws like the ACA or to introduce a public option, you're going to need to get 60 votes in the Senate. So you're going to need bipartisan support, and you're going to need some Democratic support that might not be so easily won, again, from people who are moderates in the Senate, people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia and others. But that said, I wanted to mention this budget reconciliation process briefly because it's an alternative method the Senate can use and has used to get things done. It's a special rule, or a special process rather, where you can pass in the Senate certain legislation that only affects the budget and doesn't have any extra, provisions added in, with a 51 vote, a majority vote, simple majority vote. And that was actually the process that was used by the Trump administration to pass their tax cut bill back in 2017, which zeroed out the individual mandate. That was done through the budget reconciliation process. So the question is, will Biden try to use that process to get things done if he encounters pushback in the Senate? And if you take a look at who the new Senate chairmen are, because again, the Senate's changed hands politically speaking, the Budget Committee is now chaired by Bernie Sanders. And so he's been pushing behind the scenes and sometimes even publicly for significant actions to be taken through this process, which would again only require a simple majority. And if that happens, I think you could try and see things like the return of the individual mandate being done through the budget reconciliation process. You'll see strengthening of the ACA, its subsidies under the ACA, eligibility requirements possibly. Everything that's pretty much short of full-on overhaul of the ACA, right, could probably happen under this process. So that's what we'll have to wait and see what actually comes out through there or what's proposed through that process. And I suspect we'll have a lot better of an idea of this at the end of the month or maybe early February once impeachment hopefully wraps up.
So Brady, Congress isn't the only one with plans though, and looking at these things, President-elect, few hours President Biden, he's got some plans himself. that he's looking to execute. And I know we've discussed previously, will he, won't he, on the public option, Medicare eligibility, some of the more ambitious plans. I believe there's a relief bill, right? No problem. You cut a blank check. But also a lot of things that he's looking to do, but things that he's also looking to undo as well from the previous administration. With the time we have left, do you want to talk a little bit about, you've been kind of reading the tea leaves as far as what you think President Biden wants to do and undo?
Sure. I just want to note we will address on our webinars coming up, what he plans to do about COVID, because we could talk for hours about that. But in terms of regulatory action, again, separate from the legislative options that he may have under a now Democratic controlled Congress, remember that the Trump administration really went on a record breaking pace in both passing regulations and undoing Obama era regulations. And there is a little known rule, or little-known law, rather, called the Congressional Review Act that's been in the news lately, people like me who read in depth in between the lines. It basically allows Congress to look back up to 60 legislative days and see what rules were passed by the previous administration and just undo them. If they were passed, enacted, published within 60 legislative days, there's no need to go through the typical rulemaking process to undo those rules. With the stroke of the pen, President Biden would be able to, with Congress's approval, to get rid of those rules. And there are some significant rules that the Trump administration passed with respect to healthcare in the last 60 days. They include things like the price transparency rule, the rule on drug rebates, the most favored nation drug pricing rule, and even the drug importation rule. So those are all things that actually are somewhat popular on a bipartisan basis. I'd be surprised, but maybe it's not impossible that the Biden administration doesn't like some of those rules and wants to get rid of them. And it's also funny, Ron, I was looking to see, when is 60 legislative days? Well, you and I both know how little it seems at times that Congress actually works. And it turns out that 60 legislative days ago was August 21st. So take that for what it's worth in terms of how many days they're actually on the clock.
So, Brady, I don't want to chip away too much at some of the issues we'll be talking about during our webinar. For those who are listening to this podcast and the webinar has already passed, you can actually go on our website, fiagroup.com, to the media section and download the recorded webinar. So much to say, but so little time to say it. Brady, you've already covered a lot today. I know this is not your Super Bowl. That's really the election. Is this your Pro Bowl, maybe? Your World Series? I don't know.
Pro Bowl, yeah.
But it's a big day for you, but it's a big day for everybody. It's one of those things. It's almost kind of like opening day for baseball. It doesn't matter how good or bad your team is. Everyone starts 0-0. It's a fresh slate, a clean slate. And, everybody walks into it with this optimism. So hopefully everyone's feeling the same way. Lord knows, I don't know if it'll be good or it'll be bad, but I know there's going to be some changes. And as always, we're going to keep tracking them and letting our industry partners know, A, what they need to do now, and B, for what they need to prepare for the future. But until then, I just want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank Pat, the man Santos, for producing, and thank our listeners for joining us once again for an Empowering Plans with the FIA Group podcast. On behalf of myself, Brady, Pat, the entirety of the FIA Group, thank you so much. Let's work together. Let's move forward, and let's make great things happen. Thanks so much, everybody.